Hi everybody, thanks for being here with us today. As you've already heard, we are Russell and Kirsten. We've kind of done a little bit of a divide and conquer approach to our research presentation. So I'm going to kickstart us and then I'll hand over to Kirsten, and I'll be doing the slides as well. So Kirsten, just give me the nod when you want the next one, when it's your go. Okay, so I run our research and development at the University of Bradford, and Kirsten is a scientist, and we have been working together for a little while. And my intention is to kind of give you some of the background and the scholarly basis that our current study, and our past studies dwell in. So, and obviously, if you have questions at the end, then we more than welcome those. That'd be brilliant to talk to you further. So we've done a couple of pieces of work together now, and what we were discovering about PGRs and supervision, when you look at the literature, in some parts of the literature, there's kind of quite a lot. People have been looking at this for quite a while. Other parts are really scant, and it's quite hard to get a read on what we know, what we don't know, how much we're assuming in our daily lives as supervisors, how much the PGR experience is assumed. But there are notable things that we found. So one of the key things is the sheer increase in the number of people undertaking PhDs or other doctoral level qualifications that require a research supervisor or supervisory team to be involved. That's interesting because if more people are doing it, you would imagine there'd be greater diversity in the types of learners and scholars undertaking the qualification, and they might have different needs. The other thing is the purpose has kind of subtly changed over time. So rather than purely being an entry into academia and working and teaching in universities and continuing research, the point of the doctorate has changed considerably, and there's now more than ever before people undertaking doctoral level qualifications that do not intend to go and become research supervisors themselves, run research areas and groups and so on. One of the other recent things that I think's been on everybody's radar is the idea of well-being and work-life balance and how that factors in, and how many people have had experiences of almost devoting themselves entirely to a doctoral level qualification, working loads of extra hours. And that the other thing that we know from the literature is this idea in multiple cases, multiple arenas, even research done by professional unions of academics, discovering that people are routinely overworking. That's often, in certain circles, this is venerated and almost an unwritten expectation of becoming a researcher from the early career level of PGR right through to senior research careers. And the other thing to say is that the kind of quality has changed, in that the mechanisms for looking at people's experiences and evaluating those has significantly changed over the last 20 years. The quality assurance of individual supervisory relationships or research group, department, centres, areas of expertise, they've changed, and sometimes they're a bit non-existent, and other times there's quite a lot of stringent bureaucracy, directives, policies that all are brought to bear in the room when a supervisor's there working with the PGR. And then finally, and really this is a good segue from the last presentation with Rihanna and Cecilia, that the relationship was always an important one, and there was an apprentice-like feel to the relationship, but now we're really in the realm of this idea of a functional relationship. So the thing to say from our previous research is we started with PGR. We looked at 54 PGR survey respondents in the Faculty of Life Sciences at Bradford. We're not going to go into that because that was the subject of last year's presentation, but the publication is there if it's something that interests you. It was quite fascinating. Some elements of it really echoed what's been found elsewhere. Some seemed to be unique to our particular case in Bradford. All of them had supervisors, heavily implicated, that supervisory relationship, how crucial it is. So we ended up in this place of asking about this relationship then. when we put that last data together about some of the supervisory experiences that PGR have had, current PGR are having, and then when we talk to staff in kind of staff workshops, we were beginning to wonder if there was kind of a two tribes idea, that some supervisors feel like we're all in this together and that's how they operate, and this is only earlier down a career ladder. That's what PGR is. It's not a student. And other supervisors seem to imply that there was a little bit of, the only way we could capture it was to say kind of a them and us. And we wondered, we postulated, is this because of the change in PGR, PhD candidacy status, that now every institution in the UK does register people as students? They have a student number, they have student profiles. So those were the questions that we were having, and we wanted to know how much of a supervisor's own experience of being supervised was being brought into their current supervision practice, and not so much how much that's inaccurate, in what ways that was happening, because it's not necessarily about measuring it per se. Before I hand over to Kirsten, there's just one more thing left to say, which is, well, I've got a couple more things to show you, but one main thing left to say, which is that we've been heavily influenced by two things we'd encourage you to look up if you haven't already. One is Anne Lee's work in supervision styles or approaches. And what we see about that is this difference between, are they a skills facilitator? That would be number 3 on the left. Are they about the relational aspects of fostering a future researcher? Number 5. Are they really quite functional? Is it about that contractual element of, well, here's what my job is, here's what your job is, let me stick to that, facilitate that for you? We perceive that much of academia has gone that way. And then the other one, a slightly earlier iteration of supervisory styles, which you're about to see in Kirsten's analyses from our study, is about this idea of having almost on an axis that you could be quite directive, quite personal and pastoral, quite hands-off, or again, this idea of what Lee calls functional could be called contractual, fulfilling the contract between student and supervisor. There is a direct link, there's an intersection with research culture that we want to acknowledge. So I'm not going to read slides to you, but there's lots of factors feeding into research culture, and some of them are micro, that they're in that room during supervision, and some of them are institutional, and some of them are big. They're influenced by national policy and governmental spending and edicts and so on. And then research culture, we would suggest from the literature, is rarely fruitful and nurturing if actually a lot of the challenges that are unspoken but often surface are not really addressed head on. And there's a lot of need to change systems. You know, that idea that it's not the people, it's the systems. And I saw that in a tweet earlier from Kirsten, so that's clearly come through. And then the last bit of literature for you, before I hand over to Kirsten, I'm aware of the time, is the recent publication of a huge survey that was carried out recently. And some of those discrepancies that you can see in the middle of that slide, that the individual candidates help the supervisors feel a lot of value to their work. Far fewer supervisors felt the institution valued their work. A third of all those questions were kept awake at night by issues in the supervisory relationship. A huge amount of us felt that supervision, on the right there, increased the quality of our own research and staying on top and at the vanguard of research. And over a third felt like there was no support of any note for any researchers. And one of the things that then came out through the qualitative aspects and focus groups was the idea of workload models do not adequately recognise supervision. And here we go over to Kirsten. So we really think supervisors are really critical to research culture, and that the sparse literature is a problem, and the fact that the PhD or other doctorates have moved on, but the way we treat, develop and support supervisors really has not in the last 30 years. Off you go, Kirsten.
Thank you very much, Russell. I'm going to whistle through this just so that we've still got time for some questions at the end. So just to briefly cover what we did, we sent out a survey to across our whole institution for supervisors at any career stage to be able to answer our survey questions. And there were a lot of questions in there, so this really is just the highlights. We had a look at the current supervisory responsibilities, and we found that the majority of our respondents were PI for between 1 and 2 students currently. Thankfully, there were not that many, up at 6 to 9, because I've got concerns about that. There were also very frequently co-supervisor for PhD students. And one of the things that was interesting, which we won't go into today because it's a different discussion, is the hardly any of our PhD supervisors actually supervise postdocs. So I thought that was quite an interesting thing, looking at the imbalance between those different levels of study and research. So this is the gap field that we talked about earlier. So we asked supervisors to reflect on what they felt as a student and how their supervisors treated them. And you can see from each individual dot on these pictures represents an individual respondent. So you can see that most of the supervisors that our supervisors had experienced were contractual in their style, with quite a few that were very low structure and low support. And over time, as they now have gone on to be supervisors themselves and have their own students, there's been a big swing towards the contractual style of supervision, which I think is a positive thing, because it's giving that high structure, it's giving that support, and it's helping to develop these PhD students who are coming through the system. This was the amount of time spent on supervision. So again, we're just picking and choosing particular points. The amount of time that was spent when they were a PhD student, how much formal and informal supervision that they had, and then how much formal and informal supervision they give now as a supervisor to their own PhD students. And you can see that we are spending a lot more time supervising, whether in a formal or informal manner. And we're also looking at the support to publish during and after the PhD. So the graph at the top, on the bottom half of the screen there, is looking at if they were supported during their PhD to publish their work. And you can see that there was, worryingly, there's quite a few that were never. But now, when they're talking about supporting their own PhD students, we don't have any that are not supporting them, which is a really positive thing. So this was supervisor wellbeing. This is our last data slide. And here we did a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 was never, 5 was always. And we asked for different things. So one of them was about the workload of the PhD supervisor and how they felt they were. And you can see that supervisors really feel like they have a lot of unachievable deadlines, and that these unachievable deadlines then mean that they need to neglect tasks in order to be able to get things done, which is not an ideal scenario and goes back to this overworking culture. But one of the things that was very reassuring is that although they have to neglect certain tasks, most of our supervisors did not put PhD supervision into that. So they always were, they were still prioritising their supervision work, which I think is a good thing. There were a lot of pressure to work long hours, which we all know again. But our supervisors did feel that they had independence to work in the way that they suited them, and that they had flexibility. And I think this is a really good thing, because this is starting to move towards that more inclusive research culture, where you can dictate your own hours, or you're working around childcare responsibilities, for example. So I think this is a good thing, and hopefully this is going to propagate on further to the next generation of researchers as well. The last thing that we looked at was community. So this was asking how their colleagues work with them, and that was very mixed. The thing we've got here, this is our last slide. This is a word cloud from our free-form responses for what the barriers were to effective supervision. And you can see the things that come out most of all was the WLM, which you can see going down the side there, it's workload model, came up in over half of our respondents' responses: time, communication, funding, and support. So we do know that the student-supervisor relationship plays a key role in student wellbeing, but we also know that the institutional barriers, such as administration, bureaucracy, and all this burden, does contribute to having a difficult time in being able to conduct that supervision effectively. So I think the next step that we're going to look at is what pressures are being placed on the institution. So we've looked at what's being put on the student, we've looked at what's being put on the supervisor. Let's go up. both that macro level? Are they sector-wide, and are they created by policy? You know, do we need to look at governmental and procedural regulations to be able to really bring about an inclusive research culture change? I'm going to finish there.